So we will be starting this side event titled Financing and Safeguarding a Just Transition for All. We have a wonderful lineup of speakers on site, and then also far away in Australia, listening in through the live streaming provided by the Fair Finance Asia team. My name is Yayoi Lagerqvist, and I am working with a Swedish non-profit organization called Swedwatch, based in Stockholm. And I will be the moderator of the day. Before we start, I would like to suggest a warm-up exercise. Everyone's looking very intently to the front. Can you perhaps greet a neighbor sitting close to you? I'll give you just 1 minute each. Yeah. And if you want to stretch your arms, you can do that too. But this brings me to the next round of exercise, which is who is in the room. I'm sure that you met Laura Massini, and then also Florian with the blue suit in the back. They were distributing paper tapes to you. So I would like to ask, for those of you who received the tape representing state actors, can you raise your hand or wave? Great, maybe some are trailing in as we speak. Second group, business actor, any entities, any individuals representing business actors in this room? None? Yeah? How about CSOs, civil society organizations? Yay! Great show of hands, thank you. And then the final group, others. So it could be folks working here at the UN, public financial institutions like ADB or World Bank, academia, or media folks. So others, those in the others category. Yeah, so thank you very much. So now moving into the background. Now that we know each other, I'd like to move on to the background of this side event. As you have been hearing through the last 2-3 days, renewable energy is a critical element in achieving SDG 7 and 9, as well as meeting the Paris Agreement targets. While increased investment in renewable energy is necessary, it must be grounded on both distributive and procedural justice, ensuring that states and business actors not only respect and enact gender-sensitive policies, but also protect human rights and the environment. Without the rights-based perspective, renewable energy projects can harm local communities and intensify even social conflicts. What we need is just and inclusive energy transitions. So we have a keynote that is pre-recorded by Dr. Pichamon Yeofantong, who is the current chair of UN Working Group of Business and Human Rights. Unfortunately, she was unable to come, but we have the pre-recorded film clip. And then followed by a keynote, we will have 2 dialogues involving 4 speakers, distinguished guests. First speaker is Benedette Victorio, program lead from Fair Finance Asia, which is at Oxfam. And then the second speaker is Parimita Mohanty, who is a program manager at the UN Environmental Program. And then the third speaker is Kuntanida Lasaverina. I'm so sorry for slaughtering your name. And she is a senior analyst from Bangkok, Thailand. And then the fourth speaker is PM Ponditis, who is regional campaigns and communications director at the International Rivers. And last but not least, we have a rapporteur or keynote taker, who is Katja Chitsiri from United Nations, Office of Human Rights, Office of High Commissioners for Human Rights. It's always the mix of alphabet soup. I'm so sorry. So with that said, just a brief format. We will try to make this session as lively as possible, trying to interact and engage with the audience here on site. Just a reminder that this session is being live streamed. It isn't a hybrid event, so only questions from the floor will be taken. Yeah. And then we also have distributed these tapes. Hold on to those tapes because we will be using those tapes later. Okay, with that said, I would like to move on to keynote speakers recording, if that's okay.
As I'm joining. Good day, everyone. As I'm joining you from Canberra, Australia, I would like to begin my remarks by acknowledging the Ngunnawal people as the traditional custodians of the lands on which I speak. I pay my respects to Ngunnawal elders, past, present, and emerging, thank them for their continuing care of country and community, and honor their enduring connection to land, waters, and sky. Many thanks to the organizers of this event, Fair Finance Asia, Swedwatch, UNEP, UNOHCHR's Regional Office for Southeast Asia, as well as the Stockholm Environment Institute as co-organizer, for providing the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights with this valuable opportunity to speak to an exceptionally important issue. That is, how a just and inclusive energy transition can be sustainably catalyzed, financed, and safeguarded in our region, Asia. I will focus my remarks on 3 key points, the first one being this. Transitioning to renewable energy solutions and a zero-carbon economy is a necessity. There is no doubt about this. And of course, this is a goal that requires ambition and commitment from all stakeholders, especially the duty bearers. But this transition must not come at the price of social justice or inclusion. In other words, Asia's just transition must not create new injustices, whether these be for Indigenous peoples, persons with disabilities, or other groups at risk. And admittedly, there are times when I feel like we forget that the second part of the 2030 Agenda's pledge to leave no one behind also promises to, and I quote, reach the furthest behind first. As a region, as a society, are we in fact doing enough in this regard? My opinion is that the simple answer is no. No, we are not doing enough here in Asia to reach those furthest behind first. When it comes to problematic policies or development projects, the voices of those furthest behind are still being heard last, if at all, in many parts of this region. And I'm thinking specifically here, for example, of the big hydropower projects strewn across Asia, many of which are touted by some as green energy alternatives or a source of national energy security, but which have drawn significant ire and concern from affected riparian communities as their livelihoods are put at risk and river ecosystems are harmed due to the impacts of dam construction. But there are other examples, including the extraction of transition minerals like copper and lithium, that are critical components of clean energy technologies. To be fair, there is no easy solution to the situation that we're in. However, as we chart a way forward, it is pivotal that we remember this message. A just and inclusive transition cannot truly happen if human rights are not respected and human security protected. And so as calls for the uptake of renewable energy accelerate, we need vigilance to ensure that a human rights-centered approach, a rights holders-centered approach, is applied to how we as a society move together on these issues. I know that you will shortly be hearing from the experts and environmental human rights defenders in the room who have worked tirelessly about this and other issues. So I'll leave it to them to elaborate on these issues. And I'll quickly turn now to my second point. Speaking as the Asia Pacific member of the working group, I am cognizant of the benefits that businesses can bring with respect to generating economic activity and inclusive growth. But I am equally aware of the considerable harms that irresponsible business practices can create for both people and the natural environment. The UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, which were endorsed unanimously by states in 2011, set out the corporate responsibility to respect human rights and highlight how human rights due diligence in particular is integral to preventing and mitigating the actual and potential impacts of business operations on human rights. What we need to remember is that the UN Guiding Principles also apply to investors and financial institutions, both public and private. In fact, the working group is currently working on a thematic report to be presented to the Human Rights Council in June this year on the human rights responsibilities of development financial institutions and how the cause contribute direct linkage framework elaborated upon by the UNGPs provides a basis for understanding these responsibilities. So basically, even if a financier, investor, or financial institution were to be linked to adverse human rights impacts only through their business relationships, this does not absolve them of any responsibility. If anything, it requires them to exercise even greater caution in monitoring their value chains, ensuring that their investments do not provide an enabling environment for the abuse of human rights, and putting more effort into financing and supporting both the social and physical infrastructures needed to spur the transition for sustainable development. And now I know that I'm quickly running out of time, so allow me to conclude with this. The imperatives of a just and inclusive renewable energy transition demand that we get ambitious and aim for a just energy transformation where we align the transition with limiting the average global temperature increase to achieve social, environmental, and climate justice for all. There must be coherence between policies as well as between policy and action. So we need implementation and not just pretty policies. And crucially, those furthest behind cannot be asked or forced to bear the costs of this transition. We must also bear in mind that a just transformation is needed in Asia for humans as well as for all the other sentient beings that inhabit our fragile region and indeed planet. With that, thank you so much again for inviting the working group to be a part of this timely discussion. And although I'm unable to join you in person, I will be watching intently the live stream of this event. So over to those back in the room, and thank you again.
Thank you, Pichamon, who is watching this via live streaming. So now I would like to move into the dialogue straight in. And I would like the first speaker, Bea, to perhaps reflect quickly on what Pichamon has talked just briefly.
Thank you so much, Yayoi, and good afternoon to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate that Pichamon has highlighted the importance of financing and how the role of the financial sector needs to be also in alignment with the social environmental safeguards that need to be followed as we increasingly move financial flows towards renewable energy transition in the region. So I'll keep it very short there.
And you're from Fair Finance Asia.
Correct.
And can you briefly tell us who is Fair Finance Asia and what do you do?
With pleasure. Thank you so much. My name is Bernadette. You also hear Bea. I'm Filipino. That explains the nickname. So, hi everyone. You can call me Bea for short. Fair Finance Asia is an Oxfam regional initiative. And it's essentially a network of over 90 civil society organizations committed to ensuring that financial institutions are operating in this region are upholding the social and environmental rights and well-being of communities. Fair Finance Asia is currently in 8 countries. We are in Cambodia, India, Indonesia, Japan, Pakistan, Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam. That's a lot to memorize. You can visit our website for more information. But we are also very soon launching 2 new coalitions in Bangladesh and in Laos. So we are expanding the network, hopefully to include more voices from the grounds.
You have been producing quite a number of reports regarding this important issue. Can you talk us through some of the key highlights in terms of regional trends that we see in terms of renewable energy transition in Asia?
Sure. As I mentioned, Fair Finance Asia focuses more on the overall sustainable finance across Asia, but we leverage a financial methodology, a research methodology for civil society called Fair Finance Guide International methodology. And this methodology covers broad thematic areas including climate change, gender equality, human rights, transparency, and accountability. And our coalitions across Asia have been using this to benchmark the policies of financial institutions and using this as a basis to do in-depth case studies on their actual practices on the ground. Fair Finance Thailand, of course, is here, and International Rivers is one of the members, and so they are highly familiar with this approach as well here in this country. But over the years, since we are working in these broad thematic areas, we also start to focus that we also start to notice that a lot of our partners are focusing on energy transition, infrastructure development, as well as power generation, and these sectors, of course, very well aligned to the thematic areas that we are looking at under this methodology, which is climate change, of course, human rights. And therefore, we started the work that we do as Fair Finance Asia, though this is not the only thematic area we look at. We started our work in this area on just transition since 2020. We started doing our research, and as you can see in the screen, we released our first study, The Future Without Coal, alongside the COP26 in Glasgow in 2021. And this basically focuses on how deep the financing still in Asia in terms of coal financing. This is not even looking at the whole fossil fuel financing, but just on coal. And a lot of Fair Finance Asia member countries are actually heavily reliant on fossil fuels, particularly coal. And that's why we wanted to look at this together with other linchpin countries in Asia in terms of just energy transition. And this includes not only the countries that still have coal-fired power plants, but also financing countries towards fossil financing and coal financing, including Malaysia, Singapore, China, South Korea, that are not currently part of Fair Finance Asia. The following year, in 2022, we also start to look at not only how deep the financial sector is still into coal financing, but looking at the other side. Is there actual movement towards renewable energy? Because this is always what we hear from regulators, financial institutions, that the shift cannot be happening so quickly without destabilizing affordable energy, without destabilizing the infrastructure. So we tried to study and look into whether there is meaningful movement, and that's when we launched our study last year called Financing the Just Transition alongside the G20's Leaders Summit in November. And this study we did together with our research partners Profundo, Stockholm Environment Institute, and SDRI. And basically, the study reveals what we already know, that since the Paris Agreement, the data that we collected since 2016 until 2022, there has been no upward trend or discernible trend that's going to happen in the future. And maybe we can show the data later on. in terms of financial flows moving from fossil fuels to renewable energy transition. And of course, since we launched this alongside the G20 summit last year, interestingly, this was also the place where the JETP partnerships or the JET partnerships were officially announced, and Indonesia being one of the pilot countries receiving financing for JET partnerships for ADB's energy transition mechanism. And so we also developed a study white paper together with our partner, which we released earlier this year together with our partner ADB NGO Forum, looking at the gaps and the rights-based considerations in terms of energy transition mechanisms. Of course, we think that this is a really, step towards the right direction, but still as civil society, we are very interested to look at what are the gaps that we are missing, what are the rights-based considerations that are currently not part of the implementation or the planned implementation of the initiative. And so together, the suite of these three studies so far is what we have in terms of our work in just energy transition.
Great, thank you. So for those of you interested in learning more about Fair Finance Asia's report, I believe that there is a QR code up on the screen, is it?
Yes, this is a QR code that you can scan, but also outside, I think my colleague Kyle has also put some QR codes outside if you would like to download the studies from our website. So please, you're welcome to do so.
Yeah. And I would like to also ask you, what opportunities do you see, and where is the main sort of a gap in this region in terms of achieving the SDG goals?
Right. Could you maybe move? Yes. Thank you so much. In the screen, basically, the main gaps that we could see in terms of just energy transition. Firstly, you will see in the chart what I was trying to speak about a while ago, the basically how it looks like for the key countries that we have studied for the financing or the financial flows between fossil fuel and renewable energy. We can very well see that the Asian financial sector, particularly financial institutions operating in this region, continue to finance fossil fuels even after the Paris Agreement, because this data is actually collected from 2016 to 2022. This is really showing us that despite the net zero targets and commitments and the big PR work that was done around Paris Agreement, there has been hardly any movement on the financing towards just energy transition. We also see that, interestingly, China is in fact one of the countries is leading financing towards renewable energy transition, but even them being the lead, they only have, as an average of all the strong or most significant financial institutions coming from China, only has a very small percentage of their financing moving towards renewable energy. That means they're still financing fossil fuels largely, and that means all the others that follow China are definitely lagging behind here. So having seen this, we have called this, that Asia is actually experiencing an energy addition, not a meaningful transition that we are actually wanting to see because of the slow uptake of the climate and energy policies that are not really enabling an acceleration of this transition. And more importantly, of course, we also analyze the policies behind the transition and the commitment, transition commitments being made, the net zero targets being made, and none of them is actually highlighting any of the justice element or embedding them fully in the climate and energy policy making in Asia so far. And this really exposes the underprivileged, under-resourced, and the most vulnerable groups and communities in the region to environmental risks. And as I mentioned, this is also quite important to highlight, especially for the pilot energy transition mechanisms that we are already seeing as potential large project solutions for this, which is really concerning and worrying for civil society across the region.
Thank you very much, Bea. And this brings me to the next speaker. It's a great segue into the next speaker, who is Parimita. Hello there. Parimita, can you quickly reflect on Pichamon's keynote and share your thoughts?
Sure. No, thank you so much, the chair, and good afternoon, everyone. No, this is a privilege to be here and discuss with all of you and sharing the thoughts here. I would not be able to agree more than what Pichaman said, specifically on when the clean energy transition is happening. It's equally important to make sure that how it's going to be as inclusive as possible and following the human rights-based approaches. I mean, that's something where the key is. We should not forget that while the transitioning is happening, while the investment is coming in, while the skill development is being built, it's equally important to make sure that the gender inclusiveness, the human rights-based approaches, and the leave no one behind principles are being followed. If we won't do that, then again, we are creating or probably inviting more challenges in future.
Thank you very much.
Here.
No, thank you very much. So you're emphasizing and highlighting the importance of just an inclusive energy transition as part of the conditions to meet SDG 7 and 9. Thank you. And I believe that you are at UNEP. You also work with a program that is supporting this inclusivity in this energy transition process. And I have a visual here from your program Empower. For those of you interested, there's a website there. And I particularly like this picture because you don't see the subtext underneath the caption, which says, renewable energy can be a catalyst for women's sustainable livelihood. I was intrigued by this caption. Can you tell us a little bit more about Empower and your own work at UNEP?
Sure. Maybe before that, if I may, I'd also try to bring few of the important challenges and how relevant Empower project is. So of course, we know that recently the IPCC assessment report 2023 is out. Last week, SDG progress report was launched by SCAP. And of course, a day before yesterday, the World Energy Transitioning Outlook by IRENA was also launched. So if you see all those different kind of reports, few of the numbers are mind-boggling. I mean, of course, we know that climate change, the SDG 13 targets is regressing quite a lot. But few of the things, and of course, that's also linked to GHG emission reduction. So I'm just taking few of the numbers as presented in the SDG progress reports. It's showing that this region is using 35% more or producing 35% more GHG emissions as compared to year 2000. That shows how substantially we are using GHG emissions or producing GHG emissions. Instead of going back, we are producing more, and that's what we also said, that it's more addition into that. Unfortunately, if we see the subsidy given for the fossil fuel again, which is as a share of the GDP, is also slightly increasing. That means we keep on providing subsidy for the fossil fuel based energy generation or power producing projects, unless and until the regulatory and the policy regimes are conducive enough to facilitate clean energy transitions, it's not going to happen. And also, of course, if we see the SDG 7, which is what you also mentioned about, SDG 7, out of the 5 different targets, there are certain good news in terms of international cooperations happening, which is on track. Energy access parameters are on track. Energy intensity is going okay, but it's not that going nicely or smoothly. It should be accelerated further. But the worrisome part is the renewable energy share in the overall energy use is regressing. That means the pace at which the renewable energy implementation that should happen as compared to the overall energy use is not happening, and it's regressing. We have to act fast on all those aspects. And of course, SDG 8, which is talking much more on the decent work, that there are so many targets again regressing. So the main point is, while we are moving towards clean energy transition, at the same time, the inclusiveness is not being taken care of. So there are a number of challenges. The transitioning is not happening with the scale and with the pace that it should happen. So that's one challenge. The second challenge is, whatever it is happening, it's not becoming very inclusive. So both the challenges is something what we need to address, and we have to act fast on that. We have to act now on that. That's what IPCC report says. It seems that 1.5 degree is going to happen, very soon, and it's going to be a very catastrophic event in that case. So coming back to the Empower, that's one of the activities or the program. It's a joint program between UN Women and UNEP, and it's supported, funded by SIDA, Government of Sweden. And the overall project of Empower is, of course, to mainstreaming gender equality and human rights-based approach in climate actions and DRR actions. But for the context of today's discussions, I will bring the renewable energy and how renewable energy is used as a tool for women economic empowerment and climate resilience building. That's something what we try to do under Empower project. Currently, we are in the phase 2 of Empower. In Empower 1, of course, what we try to do, which was a 5-year programs, it just got completed, Empower 1. And under that, within the purview of this renewable energy component, we work on 4 sub-pillars. One is on the policies and plans. So we work in 3 countries and come out with provincial or national action plans on renewable energy and women economic empowerment. And we also try to see how the investment happening at the national level through the investment plan of different governments or subnational can integrate the gender inclusiveness in their investment and in their economic empowerment. So that's where we try to, so that the sustainability component can be taken care of. Even if Empower project is over, but at least the national budgeting and the funding can come for the economic empowerment. So that's where the focus was. The second, we work with number of banks and trying to come out with the innovative financing scheme to see how can we provide affordable finance to potential women entrepreneurs who can then access those finance and start their businesses and enterprise. So that's the second component. The third one is on skill development. So we develop number of e-learning modules and tailor-made training modules and train number of women entrepreneurs to take up businesses on renewable energy and come out with climate resilient livelihoods. And we implement and pilot demonstrate 40 different types of climate resilient livelihoods using renewable energy, which are run by women enterprise. So that was Empower 1. But then moving forward, we are just entering in Empower 2, where the focus is based on all those tools, all those guidelines, all those repository, whatever we have developed, how could we build upon that? And how could we mobilize more resources and investment for renewable energy, making sure that it's following the gender equality and the leave no one behind principles. So that's something where the focus is, so mobilizing more finance investment on that. And secondly, how could we develop more skill sets and bringing more women and marginalized communities and participate in the overall value chain of renewable energy sector. per se. So these are, of course, beyond that, again, of course, we develop number of climate-related policies and trying to see how this could be much more gender responsive. So that's something what we are also going to implement in Empower 2. Just to answer the last point, probably, of course, the website or the web link is given here. So there are a number of resources, repository already available. So if you can go through this, but I just wanted to bring one point here, that we also, with ASEAN Center of Energy, we developed the roadmap on how to include the gender equality in the energy policies and plans for the ASEAN region. And in Empower 2, we will be implementing few of those recommendations. And we already have some kind of tools and guidelines developed on how to include gender equality in energy policies and plans. So that could be something what other countries, other member states may follow, and see how can we scale up these kind of things forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Parimita. From small to larger scale, scaling up in terms of inclusivity is quite important. I will give a moment to you in the room to perhaps ask your neighbor what caught your attention listening to these two speakers. I'll give you 2 minutes before we move into the second dialogue. I hate to interrupt you. I know that you're getting into the conversation mode. So now we're going to move into the second part of the dialogue, bringing in two speakers, Kun Tanida and Pai. Now, I'd like you to briefly, starting with Kun Tanida, perhaps reflect on the first part of the dialogue and what caught your attention listening to the first 2 or 3 speakers, including Pichamon's part of the talk.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm Tanida from the Bank of Thailand, and I'm happy to be here to talk with you about the just transition. So from the previous sessions, so I agree with all the speakers that we have to act fast. Like the energy transition cannot wait for more. We already seen the unjust, and we would like to act fast. And then I've seen from the Fair Finance Thailand report that we also finance in the fossil fuel, a big chunk of it in the fossil fuel, and we try to shift the port towards the renewable energy through our building blocks and also our initiatives on sustainable finance. And we also taking care of the transition. We've seen we have talked to the stakeholders, and we've seen that those who benefit and those who lost. So it's also important to taking care of the transition finance and think about the inclusiveness, as all the speakers have said, and talk to the stakeholders in the more, I mean, like we should outreach to more and more stakeholders. So what I would like to summarize is we have to act fast, And we, as a Bank of Thailand, try to embed the ESG or also the responsible lending to the banks. And also, we also taking care of the transition finance.
Thank you. And Tanida, you are senior analyst at the Bank of Thailand, I understand. And then you're also part of a working group working on taxonomy. So can you explain to us a little bit who are not familiar with what Bank of Thailand and the working group is doing?
Okay, so the Bank of Thailand, we have our own building blocks, and we are a part of the working group on the sustainable finance, which comprises of the monetary authorities in Thailand, the Ministry of Finance, the BOT ourselves, the SEC Thai, the Stock Exchange Market, and the OIC, the Insurance Office. So we also have the building blocks, as you have seen here. We would like to build the ecosystem that supports the transition towards the sustainable finance. So we have the 5 building blocks on the slide. So what I would like to talk about more is the green taxonomy. So we do have the green taxonomy as a part of the Thailand taxonomy board. We engage with the government agencies like Ministry of Natural Resources, Ministry of Energy, and we also engage with the financial sector. We Thai bank associations and also special finance institution and the AIB, the international banks in Thailand. And also we engage with the industry side, the Federal Thai Industrial, and especially on the renewable energy. So what we think as taxonomy is like the tools to provide a common language to categorize the economic activities to be sustainable, environmentally friendly or not. So that's the base. So, and we have the 4 building blocks. So we provide the standard practice for financial institutions to internalize the ESG process into their operations. And we also engage with the with the data. I mean that is a building block, right? So we have the standard practice, and the bank is now developing the industry handbook to tell them what to do next on the energy transition. And then we have the taxonomy to categorize, and then we engage with the government agency to build a data system just to provide businesses and banks the reliable data for them to analyze and then plan themselves towards the transition. And we also encourage banks and financial institutions to disclose their progress, their sustainability report, and to have the and we also intend to encourage the incentives like transformation loan, as we have launched like last year and during the COVID, just to make sure that financial sector can help them go to the transition finance. And also we also have the capacity building. It aims to equip everyone, I mean not everyone, but in the financial sector personnel to understand what the ESG is, the transition, the environmentally friendly activity is, and then if they are equipped, and then they can provide advisory services or help businesses to transition themselves to sustainability.
Thank you, Tanida. And I think this is relatively a new engagement, and I'm quite fascinated that it's a multi-stakeholder process that's already introduced by Bank of Thailand. Can you briefly, this was not in your original set of questions, but I'm curious, so I take the opportunity to ask anyways. What are some of the current challenges that you see in engaging in this new activity?
Not just challenges, but what we have seen is that the ecosystem here is not yet well founded. We try to lead, in the part we can do. So just to, for the taxonomy, we try to set up the common language by engaging with plenty of stakeholders. But it's just a part of the ecosystem that we would like to have. So it's also, the challenges is to build the ecosystem that provide funding or provide enough capacity to push the just transition. That's the challenging one. But we have seen government try to have the Climate Change Act and National Energy Plan, and I think maybe it's about the timing. If that comes earlier, the better the country will be.
Thank you very much, Tanida. And I would like now to move on to the next speaker, Pai. So, like Tanida and others, can you reflect on the previous speakers' parts of this program and what caught your attention during this session?
Yeah, it's been very privileged to be sitting here and speaking with our other speakers, and I agree with all of them about acting now, and if not now, when, right? The climate change is here, the PM 2.5 is happening in the north, and it's like regional problems, and looking towards the pathway to inclusive transition of zero carbon economy. If we're not acting now, is not. We might be sitting here comfortable in the aircon room and buildings, but those vulnerable groups, those cannot afford the aircon room, those who cannot afford the air purifier, wouldn't survive. So it's against the SDG. Like, we are leaving huge amount of people behind us.
Yeah, thank you. And you are a regional campaigns and communications director at the International Rivers, and you're based in Chiang Mai, I understand. Can you tell us a little bit about your work and what the International Rivers do?
Yeah, I've been working on protecting the ecosystem of river system for 20 years already, and having here at the background is a beautiful photo of the Luang Prabang town, which is a World Heritage, which is situated on the confluence of the Nam Khan and the Mekong River. And just above, upstream of this picture is a construction of the Luang Prabang Dam is happening. And I'd like to highlight this because it's our recent report produced by Fair Finance Thailand on responsible lending that we just released the end of last year. And I'd like to share with you that the moving toward the zero carbon economy with inclusiveness, with the just pattern wouldn't be possible if we allowing this kind of destructive infrastructure project happening and categorized in the renewable sector.
Yeah, thank you. And this is a magnificent picture taken by the network of Thai people in 8 Mekong provinces. Who are they? And what do they do?
Yeah, the network of Thai people in 8 Mekong provinces is a network of grassroots communities, civil society, and academics that care so much about the Mekong River, that will be working for 2 decades already, trying to bring the voice of those living along the Mekong River and been affected adversely by the hydropower construction upstream in China and also downstream in the lower basin in Laos and on Thai-Lao border. We'd like to have the meaningful participation in decision-making over so-called renewable energies on the Mekong River, and like to be more, our voice should be listened to and considered in the decision-making.
Right. So this really brings me to the second part of the question. In terms of operators and companies, investors involved in this renewable energy sector, how can they, moving forward, engage with indigenous people and local communities in a better way? What are points that needs to be taken into consideration?
Yeah, looking toward the just and inclusive energy transition under the guise of renewable energy, this kind of river system is under threat by the threatening people, human rights and environment. So when we think about how can the duty bearers, the companies, the financiers better protect human rights and the environment, there's a few points that I'd like to raise. Firstly is that the importance of civic space. Without open and safe space for civil society, for individuals, for non-state actors to speak openly and can have a say in decision making, it's not possible to talk about just and inclusive transition at all. So what we have observed in Southeast Asia, including in Vietnam, those who work on climate change, those climate leaders have been advocating for more just and inclusive energy transition, have been arrested, put in jail. So this influences other people's way of acting as well, because we don't feel safe anymore. We can be imprisoned easily if we advocate or we raise questions or if we want to speak about this that affect our livelihoods or our economy. Secondly, lots of duty bearers have made commitments around business and human rights, very pretty on paper, around importance of sustainable and inclusive development. But the actual practice, the implementation is far behind what they said in public. It might have a very nice advertorial piece on newspaper or on TV news, but in practice, how it looked like, that's significant. There's a lot of evidence in the past. Just last month, just a few weeks ago, actually, the network of Thai people in 8 Mekong provinces just received an official letter from EGAT, Thailand's energy electricity organization, confirming that this 1,400 megawatt Luang Prabang hydropower plant is going ahead. A power purchase agreement, PPA, was signed since last November without informing public. So EGAT signed this PPA with the company building the dam over here with a contract of 35 years, and it's under the so-called renewable energy, and it are affecting World Heritage. So it's not the matter of people of Luang Prabang anymore. It's not the matter of people living along the Mekong River in 6 countries anymore. It's everybody's matter. It's our heritage declared by UNESCO. Also, Laos is also example of limited, or I would say almost zero space for non-state actors to speak. There is no space for people, for civil society to speak, to raise questions against government priorities. This means that large-scale projects are being developed and implemented, violating human rights and damaging environment. So if we are talking about just energy transition, it's not just about carbon emission. It's about people's dignity, identity, culture, economy, livelihoods, and relationship with ecosystem. So we need to look at it more holistically, not just carbon, not just. So on effective engagement, the key principle is that if you want to effectively engage, you need to better understand and you need to listen to the people that you like to engage and see it from their point of view. So what's happening in this region, in the Mekong region, has been opposite sides. There are plenty of guidelines, very beautiful guidelines, good standards, fancy principles, such as free prior informed consent for indigenous people. But from my own experience and the experience of civil society groups, my own experience working in the Mekong and Salaween Basin for 2 decades, working with grassroots and civil society in this region, it's clear that people know what they want. They want to see the future in a sustainable manner. But what's happening is that decision making just ignore the voice of majority, just ignore the voice of the most vulnerable groups. So the essence of effective engagement is that you respond to them, you really see them, you really listen to them, and take what they say into account. So last part, on the pathway on action, how do we do it? a lot can be done. And I like to focus on one thing, is that the power development plan process is currently not transparent at all. It's driven by vested interests. There are lots of options to meet the region's energy demand, not just hydropower, not just coal, not just large scale. There are options that are more accountable, less harmful, and not violating human rights. This could be possible only with meaningful participation, not just ticking the box that you meet with people and you tick it. It's meaningful, how to meaningfully engage with most vulnerable groups, the direct affected people. So in the case of Thailand, we're sitting here comfortable, but you know, people paying the electricity bill in Thailand are complaining very largely that the electricity bill is so expensive. Why we need such new renewables like this, like the Luang Prabang Dam or other dams on the Mekong River or and elsewhere. In December last year, the Consumer Council in Thailand, with over 140 organizations, submitted a letter to the Thai Energy Ministry outlining that the key demand for a better way to meet Thailand energy needs and more economically viable and more equitable. So on financials, very last part, there are some significant developments in terms of commitment, much stronger execution list. The bank will not fund coal. Some banks will not fund coal anymore, nor funding large so-called renewable projects like hydropower. But in practice, we have to look at it like very, very closely. And talking about the inclusive transition and just transition, I think it's important to put people at the center, not creating chance for companies or financiers just to grab common natural resources just for their own interests.
Thank you very much for that important note. Now, I'm going to come back to you, to the audience once again. You have been chatting in the last session, so I'll give you another 2 minutes to continue on your conversations, to reflect on Tanida and Pai's part of the talk. Don't worry about it. Sorry to interrupt you again. I know that the next round of the conversation is carrying on. Now, moving on to the Q&A. After listening to the four speakers, if you want to raise any questions to any of the speakers, perhaps this is a great opportunity. I know that SEI's Niall has a first question already. So please introduce yourself briefly and shoot away your question.
Okay.
But it would be great if you can address who the question is targeted to. Thank you.
It's Niall O'Connor. I'm at the Stockholm Environment Institute. So maybe not specific question per se at the moment, but first of all, a very much big thank you to everybody on the panel here. I thought I got some very interesting information from you all. And I think there's a lot of challenges that we have ahead of ourselves to try and solve some of these problems. But just looking at some of the issues that we have to face. We do a report every 2 years called a production gap report, which is looking at the demand for energy that we're going to be looking at, the production of energy, against where it needs to be going to reach the Paris Agreement targets of 1.5 degrees. And we can see that the gap is increasing all the time. So we have all these NDC agreements, government agreements, that we want to fight climate change. And on the same time, the governments are also supporting the investment in fossil fuels across the world. So we're seeing a massive divergence from where we need to be going to protect the planet from 1.5 or even 2 degrees to where we're currently going. And there's a big problem with that. And we need to ensure that this is at the forefront of the change that we want to bring on. We know that looking at LEAP models of long-term energy planning models for the region here, there's huge increases in energy demands. And most of that is going to be met by coal. So again, we're seeing that even though we're trying to push and fight for renewables, governments are consistently pushing for coal. So there's some issues around the political economy of coal. Why are they doing it? Why are they investing in it? And we talk about political will to change this. If they're driving NDCs and trying to say we commit to these, and at the same time behind the backs of most, they're going and increasing the investments in fossil fuels, we're never going to reach the targets that we're trying to get to. And I think there's a lot of challenges that will bring about. So really, where is the political will to see this change versus where is the reality? We are so far behind, and I think it was mentioned here a few times now, but also the civil society space to ensure that we have inclusion in decision-making, inclusion in what are the processes we need to go forward. That space is shrinking across the region as well. So we're finding that the ability on many fronts is being challenged to try and find the right solutions. And I was listening to somebody talk the other day. We already know that we're, unfortunately, as a result of poor air quality, which has been predominantly from fossil fuels, we could be anywhere between 7 and 9 million people dying annually. We've also got people dying of heat stress as a result of climate change, again, as a result of fossil fuels. But we're also then looking at the amount of people who are struggling and suffering and dying from the impacts of climate change on droughts, floods, and other natural disasters. All of these things, you know, we have to bring all of this together to be able to really push the point that change is absolutely imminent. We need to do it now before more and more people continue to suffer. Then you turn around, you see the oil companies got a profit of one oil company got a profit of 161 billion last year, and yet we're giving subsidies still to these companies. You know, again, where do we see the ability to transfer these subsidies into renewable energies? We know it's as cheap, and if not cheaper in many cases, to produce renewable energies. How do we drive towards this divestment from fossil fuels and reinvestment into renewable energies? And I think it's a key drive that has to shift over the coming years. And then we see also a COP. It's been overrun by the oil industries. How do we trust the process in COP? It's kind of scary that the next COP again is being chaired by the ex-person of an oil company. Are they really willing to make the changes that we want? So, but again, when civil society space is shrinking, when businesses are taking over the global kind of dialogue on climate, how are we going to really push our agenda? And I think that's a scary reality. So I think in trying to improve a lot of this, a lot of the work we're doing around finance and with the work that Fair Finance Asia is doing as well, is how do we make finance more accessible? There's a lot of problems with the current kind of taxonomies and terminologies and criteria used to gain access to finance. Most communities will not be able to access climate finance. It's too complicated. In 1 year it's called blue finance, next it's green finance, then it's blended, then it's sustainability, then it's this, that and the other. And then the taxonomies are different in every country. We're making it almost impossible for the vulnerable communities to gain access to try and get finances to create resilience against climate change. How do we turn that around and make it more simple? And one of the areas that SEI is looking at is the Centre for Financing Sustainability, as opposed to sustainable financing. We've got to start thinking about how we make it accessible for everybody to provide the support. And I think some of the work Empower is doing was fantastic, and some of the work that we see amongst many of the panelists can help us push that forward. So I'm very keen to see how we can support that. And then just lastly, you know, this whole drive for a just, an equitable and inclusive transition, extremely challenging, but we all have to come together to do that. And I'm not going to mention it, but gender and gender equality is a key area. But we have a nice panel of 6 women speakers. I hope the pendulum doesn't keep swinging too far, but I think it's brought very good value to what we have today. But you know, if it was 6 men, I know what the reaction will be in the room. So we have to make sure that we're all thinking of this and changing this, so that it's not kind of the opposite end of the spectrum. But I have no problem with this panel. please believe me. So
thank you, Neil.
yeah, so I just want to say thanks to everybody for the remarks so far.
Thank you, Neil. We can. So I take it that as a comment rather than a specific question. We can perhaps take two questions. So one here and one. You might have to do your paper, rock, scissors between the three guys over there.
Okay. I'm Roby Halib. I'm with the Right Energy Partnership with Indigenous Peoples. It's an Indigenous-led multi-stakeholder platform that supports Indigenous peoples in relation to concerns on the transition to renewable energy, but also facilitating access to energy for Indigenous peoples by promoting Indigenous-led renewable energy systems. So before my question, I'd like to focus on what Dr. Pichaman said on the transition is creating new injustices, but it's also aggravating existing injustices for Indigenous communities who are already facing a lot of problems with mining, with dams, with plantations. This transition to renewable energy is encouraging more extraction, more large-scale plantations, and the way that these renewable energy projects are being implemented are more at a large-scale level. Windmills that are affecting livelihood of Indigenous peoples, large solar farms, again, that are affecting the lands and resources of Indigenous peoples. On financing, while a lot of financing really goes, it's corporate, it's again, more at the corporate level, but I think there's also hope. It should not just be large scale when we look at the transition to renewable energy. No, there should also be financing directly going to communities. Our partner here from Malaysia, Tonibong Malaysia, they're doing good work in really advancing Indigenous-led renewable energy system, making renewable energy more affordable, more accessible for Indigenous communities. And this is what we want to promote. No? If we really are to realize the transition to renewable energy, it's not just to cater cities and companies, but more importantly, communities who don't have access to energy. Also on the part of financing, it's not just to stop funding fossil fuels, no, but I think in renewable energy projects, there's a lot of grave human rights violations, and stopping financing to these projects should also be looked at. And lastly, on accountability, and maybe Dr. Pichaman can also look into this, no, because it's very difficult to call for corporate accountability in all projects. Indigenous peoples are being given the runaround by governments, by corporations. Even at the project level, it's not accessible, it's not effective. When you go to the international financial institutions, it's even more difficult. When you go to governments, there's really simply no accountability in this process. So how do we strengthen accountability in this transition? Because it can never be just without accountability.
Thank you very much. In one final question, you got to fight it out. Thank you. But mind you, for those of you who have burning questions, we have a burning questions board over there. So make sure that you write it down for us. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm Ben Swanton from Project 88, and my question is this. It seems that the UN, through projects like Empower, is promoting technical fixes to what are, at their core, political problems. At the same time, as one panelist noted, governments in the region have imprisoned the very environmental activists, leading efforts to promote just energy transition, while at the same time receiving lucrative deals to help them transition away from fossil fuels. In Vietnam, for example, 4 activists were arbitrarily criminally prosecuted, and these were the same people who were responsible for pushing the government to commit to a policy of net zero emissions by 2050. At the same time, the government has enacted a series of legal and extra-legal measures designed to limit the autonomy and impact of civil society organizations. So what is the UN and other actors represented on this panel doing to ensure that protecting human rights defenders and civic space are not subordinated to climate change diplomacy? What is being done to address these political problems? And I note that Kun Pianpon identified this problem in her presentation, but it's not clear exactly what is being done to address excesses of corporate and state power while giving people a voice in decision-making processes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm conscious of the time, so I would ask all the speakers to quickly wrap it up, but also answering some of the questions from the audience. So starting off from Bea.
Thank you so much. I saw a lot of men trying to regain the balance, so asking questions at the end. So thank you so much for that. Maybe very quick points. I think I also want to make sure that it's mentioned here that it's not simplistic to say that we are asking financial institutions to move their financing or investments from fossil fuels, to renewable energy, and we definitely recognize that that's not the simple solution, because we know very well that it can very well create imbalance in another supply chain in the energy sector. And thank you so much for raising that. I have very small real estate in my PPT, but if we do look at the renewable energy, shares in the type of transition, Kun Pai also mentioned it, large infrastructure projects like dams are not considered as sustainable. And there are many other also, as our partners would call, false solutions in terms of renewable energy solutions. And we do support, of course, that as civil society to ensure that we are really looking at clean energy solutions, not solutions or renewable energy false solutions that will create more stress to the environment, the water supply, or the create more stress on the social aspects, including labor, lack of livelihood, etc. So that is important to mention here, that it's not only moving from one bucket to the other. With regards to the shrinking civic space, this is really important. Fair Finance Asia works with national coalitions, and many of our partners are definitely concerned with this, and it's a really important area to consider, especially as energy advocacy is becoming more of an energy security framing discussion, and this is really difficult for civil society working in this area. We are seeing this definitely, for example, in the energy transition mechanisms that we are monitoring. You rightfully mentioned that many of these are not taking into consideration, for example, asking the governments that are receiving such financing for just energy transition partnerships to give up the other side, the fossil fuels, or at least ask them to have a very clear transition plan away from those, like a time-bound commitment on how they will transition out of that and move more systematically in structured manner towards renewable energy transition. So there's definitely many risks and loopholes that are still there and gaps. And if you want to discuss further, please download our studies, and we are happy to discuss also moving forward.
Yeah. And Tanita?
Thank you.
I think that the key for the financial sector is just to do a lot more about the stakeholder engagement. I think we cannot be do the transition plan inclusively without talking to the stakeholders. And as the monetary authorities, we also encourage banks to know their status, set up their plan, and then they can come up with a product scheme or transition plan to both to themselves and also to the businesses that are their customers. So speaking of the taxonomy, we also thinking it as a living document, and we try our best to be in line with the international standard. We do not want to speak like so many languages to confuse the investors and the lenders and borrowers. So it will be just a part of the ecosystem that we all have to push and to make to have the just energy transition, not only for the financial sector, but all of the one Thailand, the whole Thailand.
Thank you very much, Tanida. And Parimita?
Thanks. So for us, maybe I'll bring 2 points. One is, of course, I said that the energy transitioning, while it's important, we at UNEP make sure that the environmental aspects are also taken care of. So how the environmental and human rights based approaches and the safeguards are taken care of is one of our focus. And in related to that, of course, my colleague Georgie and Eileen, they are here. They are working and come out with a policy brief to see, and with key recommendations on what are those interventions and activities or recommendations that needs to be taken care of while installing or developing the hydro projects or maybe other kind of renewable energy projects in future. Of course, they also have a plan to come out with more series of those kind of recommendations for different renewable energy projects and what kind of environmental safeguards that and HRA based safeguard that needs to be taken care of. Of course, maybe that policy brief can be released further. Coming back to the ethnic minorities and working more closely with the distributed renewables systems, that's something we kept on saying, and we are lobbying for that while large-scale renewables has its own relevance and important, but we cannot ignore the distributed renewable energies, implementations and involving communities for livelihoods and for the overall socio-economic development of the community. So that's something what we have been trying last time in G20 presidency with Indonesia, now with India, and with several other forums and the kind of partnership and alliance that has been created to make sure that the distributed renewables is also getting an important role in NDCs and in various targets and in a much more inclusive manner. So that's something what we have been trying. Coming back probably to the last question on what UN is doing, maybe that's probably something again. I'm glad that Georgie is here, and I would not be able to even do full justice in responding that. So maybe Georgie can either respond to that point now or maybe after the session.
Perhaps after the session. And finally, Pai.
I would say that the just an inclusive transition cannot materialize without meaningful participation of all stakeholders. Every stakeholder, particularly the one who pay the most, or the one who bear the cost. And what is legal today might be unjust. So we need better law that ensure that everybody are protected, environment are protected, and human rights are protected.
Thank you very much. Which now brings me to the final sort of wrapping up session. And I'd like to introduce Katya Chizuri, Deputy Representative of the Regional Office for Southeast Asia at UNOHCR.
Thank you very much. And I'm mindful of time, and at the same time, it would be so difficult to give justice in a summarized manner to such a rich discussion with our panelists today, and Dr. Pichamon's powerful reminder of the importance also of the implementation of the guiding principles on peace and human rights and other international human rights standards. And maybe I will take it from there in my very few, like Twitter styles, wrap-up points. We were reminded how oftentimes it's not just a matter of lack of legislation or policies, but it's a matter of their effective implementation. And it's really important that, in particular for the perspective of duty bearers to walk the talk, we see, for instance, how there has been a strong momentum for national action plans for business and human rights, and they indeed encapsulate a number of the key points that were brought up by our panelists today, whether it's in terms of protect, including the voices of those who put those issues forward, such as environmental human rights defenders. And this is an issue which is critical to the UN and in particular for the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Civic participation, and what really is meaningful. So we were reminded at some point how this is not a tick-the-box exercise, but we need to be quite conscientious about this and be as thorough as this a just transition would require. So on a very final note, of course, we were reminded that time is of the essence. There is, we don't have the luxury of time, so action is already overdue. And also that we need to put people at the center, if I can end with this important takeaway, including to be true to one of the key principles of the 2030 Agenda, which is leave no one behind. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katja. So that brings us to the end of this side event. I'm sure that you have had a lot of food for thoughts today, but if you still have a burning questions, the burning questions board is over there, so make sure to write your questions down for us. We might not be able to answer it right away, but we will be wrapping up and documenting lessons learned. And yes, thank you, Karin. I am coming to that, your tapes. I hope you haven't lost it during this side event. When you are exiting, we would like you to put your tape where your mood is. Maybe it's been a longer session than you anticipated and you feel very tired. Maybe this session didn't really hit the note. There are lots of burning questions that were not answered. I apologize. But if you can put them on the mood board there, that will be fantastic. And thank you very much for the organizers. It's been a privilege to be working with highly dedicated group of individuals working for this organization. And this side event was funded by Government of Sweden, SIDA. And then also special thanks to Romchat, and she's got a very long last name as well, UNOHCHR, who is following us through the live streaming, and also Dr. Pichamon, who is following us through the live streaming in Australia. Thank you very much for your dedicated effort. Keep doing the great things that you are doing. And thank you, lastly, for the audience. Enjoy your afternoon. Thank you.